Young NBA talent is popping off at a more prosperous rate than we have arguably ever seen before, and the overall talent level of the NBA is at an all-time high, as demonstrated by the number of unbelievable performances we have been seeing lately. For the young players who are still making their way through the ranks and just getting started, the important thing to watch for is flashes of upside and potential, because over time the hope is for those flashes to become the more consistent norm for them. Those that show impressive upside then enter the next season with hopes of breaking out and taking a step forward, but things don't always work out that way, unfortunately, which brings us to the topic of today's video. Today we'll be discussing 5 young players in particular that entered this season with general expectations of having a breakout year by fans and the media alike, but unfortunately they have failed to do so. Before we start though, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now with that being said, let's begin. The first young player that we all expected to break out this season but failed to do so is Scottie Barnes of the Toronto Raptors. Barnes took home the league's Rookie of the Year award last season amongst a pretty stacked group of talent, so needless to say, that set the tone for the kind of career that was expected of him moving forward. Barnes' defensive impact and versatility made him incredibly valuable to the Raptors on their way to a playoff berth last year, and offensively, he was an efficient slasher who finished well at the basket, while also serving as a secondary playmaker. In a sense, he's a jack-of-all-trades player who can give you a little bit of everything, and going into his second season, his role was expected to expand, which in turn made most of us expect him to take a leap in terms of his production, but instead, he's taken a step backward in many areas. His scoring has basically stayed the same, but it decreased by less than a point per game from last season, but his shooting splits are also much more mediocre this year than what it was last year, which is most worrying of all. And also his jumper has been a mess, and defenses are even starting to sag off of him on the perimeter in a comparable way to how they used to treat Ben Simmons. This obviously makes it more difficult to score if he can't even make defenses respect his jumper, and while he has still been stellar on the defensive side of things, he's just not having this kind of follow-up season that you would have expected from a Rookie of the Year winner. The next young player that has failed to break out after early season expectations is Cam Reddish of the New York Knicks. Reddish is easily the most common name on lists like this because he's been on them for a few years now. Every season there seems to be a reason to believe it could be the year that he takes that step forward, and then every season a new setback holds him back and he fails to deliver. In Atlanta, he'd have a few stretches where he'd flash potential as a scorer, and then he'd follow it up with poor performances that resulted in him struggling to get consistent playing time. When he was traded to the Knicks last season, the hope was that he'd be able to flourish in a new opportunity, but instead he once again found himself struggling to get a consistent role in the rotation. This season, he did begin the year in the rotation and started the year off hot with a 22-point game in the team's season opener, but then he went right back to being the streaky, inefficient shooter that he's always been, and now once again finds himself completely out of the team's rotation. The biggest issue with Reddish is that he plays as though he expects to be the star of the team, and some of the shots that he takes are definitely ill-advised for a player trying to prove himself, and he struggles to buy in on defense, which doesn't help him either. The reality is that if Reddish wants to stick around in the NBA, he's going to have to embrace the duties that come from being a role player, which means playing more within the flow of the offense, making smarter decisions, limiting mistakes, and competing on defense, because the reality is that he's not going to be the star player that he and many others thought he was going to be. The next young player that failed to break out despite preseason expectations is Killian Hayes of the Detroit Pistons. Killian Hayes was a top 10 pick back in the 2020 NBA draft, but needless to say, he has failed to play up to the expectations of someone taken that early on. His first 2 seasons in the NBA were nothing short of a disaster, as he was genuinely one of the worst scorers in the whole league in terms of how he was shooting the ball, but he flashed a knack for passing the ball and creating for teammates, so it wasn't by any means time to give up on him. The hope before this season was that he would take any kind of step forward shooting the basketball so that his playmaking talents could be put more on display, but unfortunately, he just hasn't found the touch. He is scoring a career-high 9 points per game this year, and he's shooting a career best from 3, but that career best is making just 32% of his shots from deep, which speaks volumes of how poorly he was shooting it before, and the leap in scoring is just a product of higher usage, as he's still making just 37% of his shots total. Hayes' inability to threaten defenses as a scorer holds him back mightily from impacting other areas of the game, and the Pistons perform 7.5 points better with Hayes on the bench, so unfortunately, Hayes continues to trend closer to being a bust than a breakout candidate. The next young player that has failed to break out this season is Jalen Suggs of the Orlando Magic. Suggs was a top 5 pick in last year's draft after a collegiate campaign that saw him lead his Gonzaga team all the way to the championship game. As a prospect, he demonstrated that he was not only poised as a young point guard with great leadership skills, but he was also a big-time playmaker who acted as a floor general that could hit big shots and take command of an offense. As a rookie in Orlando, though, he faced a lot of the typical struggles that come from being a rookie guard, as he was wildly inefficient and inconsistent. This year, the expectation was that he would take a step forward because most young guards do elevate their games in their second seasons, but this year Suggs has yet to show much improvement at all, and still struggles in a lot of the areas that he struggled in as a rookie, which is a bit baffling. When he was drafted, there really weren't that many concerns with his jumper translating, but he just has not been able to get his shot to fall in the NBA, as he's making just 28% of his threes this season after making an abysmal 21% of them last season. He has struggled a bit with injuries to this point, so there is obviously still hope for him to get things together when he's healthy, but he lands on the list today because that turnaround has not happened yet. And finally, the last young player that failed to break out this season after expectations of doing so is Moses Moody of the Golden State Warriors. Moody was a lottery pick in 2021 because of his capabilities to serve as a promising 3-and-D wing with sneaky shot creation in his toolbox. He wasn't a mainstay in the Warriors' rotation last year as a rookie when they won the title because contending obviously took priority over developing their rookie, but this offseason the Warriors allowed quite a few wing players from their rotation to leave, including Otto Porter, Gary Payton, and Damian Lee, so minutes were up for grabs this year and many expected Moody to take some of them. He had a very strong showing in Summer League where his jumper was falling and he was showing that he could lock up opposing perimeter players, but after getting his fair share of opportunities early on this season, he does seem to be falling out of favor in the rotation. He's not necessarily shooting the ball poorly, but he's just not leaving much of an imprint on games when he does get chances, as he's averaging just 5 points per game, and the fact that the Warriors perform 9.7 points worse with him on the court compared to when he's on the bench does not help him much either. He's still young, so of course there's no reason to give up on him or anyone else on this list, but they just weren't quite ready to break out this season as initially hoped. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what you think about these young players and their futures. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.